The sun hovered low on the horizon, casting an amber glow over the dusty plains of Gaugamela. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear, mingling with the metallic tang of sharpened iron. Thousands of men stood poised for battle, their armor glinting like scales of a restless dragon. A tense silence fell, broken only by the distant cry of a bird, an omen, perhaps, in this land of legends. Amidst the ranks, a lone figure sat astride his steed, his presence commanding and serene. Alexander, the young king of Macedonia, surveyed the field with steely resolve. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, caught every movement, every flicker of the enemy's vast army stretched out before him. The Persian forces, led by King Darius III, were a formidable sight, an ocean of soldiers and chariots that seemed to stretch into the very edges of the earth. A whisper of wind lifted the dust, swirling it around Alexander like a spectral cloak. He raised his arm, silent and still, a signal to his men. The anticipation was palpable, each heartbeat echoing like thunder in the chests of those who awaited his command. Then, with a swift, decisive motion, his arm fell. The ground trembled as the Macedonian phalanx surged forward, a living wall of spears and shields, their feet pounding the earth in unison. The clash was deafening. Metal against metal, the cries of men and horses mingling in a chaotic symphony. Blood darkened the soil, the sharp scent mingling with the acrid smoke of burning wood. Alexander rode forward, a beacon of determination amidst the chaos, his sword a blur of silver as he carved his path through the fray. But to understand how we got here, to this pivotal moment where destinies were forged in fire, we must turn back the pages of time, to a simpler era, in the heart of ancient Macedonia. In the dim glow of early dawn, before the sun cast its first light upon the rugged hills of Macedonia, a young boy named Alexander would rise. The air was crisp, carrying a chill that nipped at his skin, invigorating him as he prepared for the day's lessons. Born in 356 BC in the ancient city of Pella, Alexander was the son of King Philip II, a formidable ruler with an iron will, and Queen Olympias, a woman of intense passion and ambition. Their union, stormy and volatile, set the stage for the life of their son, a life destined for greatness and shadowed by prophecy. Pella was a place where the scent of olive oil mingled with the sharp tang of bronze, a bustling hub of activity where merchants traded goods from distant lands and soldiers trained for battles yet to be fought. The young Alexander, with his piercing eyes and a curiosity that seemed insatiable, often wandered through these streets, absorbing the sights and sounds like a sponge. His mind, a fertile ground, was watered by stories of heroes and legends, tales that spoke of glory and conquest. Under the tutelage of Aristotle, the great philosopher whose wisdom was renowned across the known world, Alexander's education blossomed. Aristotle, with a voice as steady as the flow of a gentle stream, introduced him to the works of Homer, instilling in him a reverence for knowledge and a fascination with the broader world. Alexander's imagination soared, fueled by the exploits of Achilles and Odysseus, heroes whose deeds resonated through the ages. But beyond the allure of myth, Aristotle imparted a vision of a world united under a single banner, a tapestry woven from the threads of diverse cultures and peoples. Yet, it was not only the tales of old and the teachings of philosophers that shaped Alexander. In the quiet moments, away from the clamor of Pella, he often found himself reflecting on his father, Philip. A man of exceptional military prowess, Philip had transformed Macedonia from a fractured kingdom into a formidable power. His conquests were not merely territorial, they were strategic, each victory a stepping stone towards his ultimate ambition. The young Alexander watched, learned, and absorbed his father's methods, the art of warfare becoming as natural to him as breathing. Philip's court was a place of intrigue and tension, a cauldron where ambition simmered and alliances shifted like the sands of the desert. It was here that Alexander learned the complexities of leadership, the delicate balance of power, the necessity of loyalty, and the ever-present threat of betrayal. The scent of wine and the murmur of hushed conversations filled the halls, as nobles plotted and schemed, each with their own designs on the future. Amidst this backdrop, Alexander's own ambitions began to take shape, fueled by a desire not just to emulate his father, but to surpass him. He was driven by a singular purpose, to carve out a legacy that would echo through eternity. This ambition, however, carried with it a weight, a burden that rested heavily on his young shoulders. He understood the price of glory, the sacrifices it demanded, and the relentless pursuit it required. As the years passed, the bond between father and son was tested, strained by the pressures of power and the inevitability of succession. Philip, though proud of Alexander's capabilities, was wary of his growing influence. The whispers of the court, like the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, spoke of a future where Alexander would eclipse his father, a future that was both promising and perilous. In 336 BC, under a sky painted with the hues of dusk, the world that Alexander knew was irrevocably altered. King Philip II, a figure as towering as the mountains themselves, was struck down, assassinated at his daughter's wedding. The air was thick with the scent of betrayal, and the shockwaves of his death rippled through the kingdom. In that moment of chaos and uncertainty, Alexander ascended to the throne, his destiny unfurling before him like the scrolls of ancient lore. His rise to power was swift and decisive, the transition as seamless as the flow of a river. Alexander moved with purpose, consolidating his position, quelling potential uprisings with a blend of diplomacy and force. The once vibrant halls of Pella, now shrouded in mourning, bore witness to the emergence of a new ruler, one who would lead his people into an era of unprecedented conquest. The tensions of the past, the ambitions of his father, and the teachings of Aristotle all coalesced within Alexander, forging a leader of unparalleled vision. His gaze turned eastward, towards the mighty Persian Empire, a vast expanse of land and wealth ruled by Darius III. It was a realm ripe for conquest, a challenge that called to him like a siren's song. The air was charged with anticipation, the scent of opportunity mingling with the dust of the road ahead. Alexander, with the weight of history upon him, prepared to embark on a journey that would test the limits of his resolve and the boundaries of his empire. The world as it was before, a world of promise and peril, of dreams and destiny, was but a prelude to the epic saga that would unfold. As the final echoes of his father's reign faded into silence, Alexander stood on the precipice of history. The night was still, the stars above a silent testament to the vastness of the universe and the smallness of one man against its infinite canvas. Yet in that stillness, there was a whisper, a promise of greatness, of a legacy that would endure long after the sands of time had buried the memory of his name. And so, with resolve as unyielding as the Macedonian hills, Alexander set forth, his journey just beginning, the world before him vast and uncharted. The story of his life, of his rise and his fall, would be written not just in the annals of history, but in the hearts and minds of those who would come after. A story whispered through the ages, a tale to be told as you drift into sleep. In the early dawn of 334 BC, as the first fingers of light crept over the horizon, Alexander stood on the banks of the Hellespont. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the tang of the sea and the quiet rustle of distant olive groves. His eyes, sharp and filled with determination, gazed across the narrow strip of water separating Europe from Asia. This was not just a physical boundary, but a symbolic one that marked the beginning of his campaign to reshape the known world. Behind him, the Macedonian army stirred, a living testament to his ambition and leadership. The soldiers murmured in the early morning, their voices a low, rumbling tide, each man aware that they were about to step into history. The crossing of the Hellespont was more than a military maneuver. It was an assertion of destiny. As Alexander's army made its way across the water, he paused to cast a spear into the Asian soil, a declaration of intent to conquer. The splash of the spear echoed in the minds of his men, a promise of battles to come, of glories yet to be won. Each step onto the foreign land was laden with the weight of history, a march towards immortality. In the months that followed, Alexander's conquests unfolded like a tapestry woven from threads of audacity and strategic brilliance. The clash at Granicus was swift, the Macedonian phalanx slicing through the Persian forces like a blade through silk. The ground shook with the thunder of hooves, the air filled with the metallic clang of swords, the cries of men, and the harsh commands of officers driving their troops onward. The scent of trampled grass and churned earth mingled with the coppery tang of blood. Victory was theirs, and with it the path into Asia Minor lay open. As they moved deeper into Persia, the landscape shifted beneath them. hills giving way to vast plains, the air growing hotter, the sun a relentless sentinel in the sky. In city after city, Alexander's reputation grew, a force as tangible as the dust gathering on his soldiers' boots. His vision was not merely one of conquest, but of cultural fusion, a blending of Greek and Eastern influences that would forever alter the course of history. The locals watched in a mixture of awe and trepidation, their fates now intertwined with the whims of this young conqueror. At Issus, the clash was fierce. Alexander faced Darius III himself, the Persian king whose very name was a symbol of authority and power. The battle was a dance of chaos and order, of calculated risks and bold maneuvers. Alexander, at the head of his cavalry, was a figure of inspiration, his presence a beacon for his men amidst the swirling dust and cacophony of war. The Macedonian army, disciplined and relentless, carved a path through the Persian ranks. The cries of the wounded mingled with the roar of victory as Darius fled, leaving behind his family and his dreams of dominion. Each victory was a building block, a step closer to the grand vision Alexander harbored, a world united under his rule. Yet, with each triumph, the stakes grew higher, the risks more profound. The people around him, his generals and advisors, began to whisper of destiny and divinity, of Alexander as a figure touched by the gods. His mother, Olympias, had always told him he was the son of Zeus, and as his empire expanded, so too did the mythos surrounding him, a potent blend of reality and legend. The march continued, the army a river flowing inexorably towards the heart of Persia. At Gaugamela, the stakes were at their zenith. Here, in the autumn of 331 BC, Alexander faced the full might of Darius's forces. The night before the battle, the air was thick with anticipation, the camp alive with the rustle of preparations, the low murmur of prayers. Alexander, calm and composed, moved among his men, his presence a balm to their nerves. His strategy was audacious, a masterstroke of military genius that would forever be studied and admired. When dawn broke, it was into a sky stained with the hues of impending conflict. The battlefield was a canvas, soon to be painted with the chaos of war. Alexander charged, his cavalry a spearhead of determination, slicing through the Persian lines with precision and ferocity. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the struggle, the air filled with the acrid scent of sweat and fear. Darius, again, was forced to flee, his empire crumbling like sandcastles before the tide. With Persia subdued, Alexander's gaze turned eastward to the lands beyond, to the mysteries of India. Each new territory was a testament to his insatiable curiosity, his desire not just to conquer but to understand, to blend cultures into a new, harmonious whole. Yet for all his successes, cracks began to appear in the facade of invincibility. His men, weary from years of campaigning, longed for home, for the familiar comfort of Macedonia's rolling hills and olive groves. The distance between leader and follower grew, a chasm born of fatigue and the relentless march of ambition. In Babylon, Alexander paused, the city a jewel in the crown of his conquests. Here, amid the splendor of ancient palaces and the hum of vibrant markets, he began to weave his legacy. He encouraged marriages between his men and local women, a symbolic gesture of unity and peace. He embraced the customs and traditions of his new subjects, a ruler not just of lands but of hearts and minds. Yet shadows loomed. Rumors of plots and betrayals whispered through the corridors of his court, like a chill wind before a storm. Alexander, once an embodiment of youthful vigor and optimism, began to show signs of wear. The weight of his empire was a heavy mantle, one that bore down upon him with increasing intensity. The death of his beloved Hephaestion struck hard, a blow from which he struggled to recover. As the months passed, Alexander's health waned, his once vibrant presence diminished by an unknown ailment. In the summer heat of 323 BC, he lay in the palace at Babylon, the once unstoppable force now confined to a bed. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the murmur of anxious voices. On a day that should have been filled with the promise of new beginnings, Alexander's life flickered out like a candle snuffed too soon. His death sent ripples through the empire, a shockwave of uncertainty and fear. The dream that had driven him, the vision of a world united, now lay in fragments, scattered like seeds upon the wind. Yet, in his wake, Alexander left an indelible mark, a legacy of cultural fusion, of military genius, of a man who dared to dream beyond the horizon. As the night deepened and shadows stretched across the earth, the story of Alexander the Great settled into the annals of history. A tale of rise and fall, of ambition and legacy, whispered softly into the sleep of the world. The dawn of a new day cast its soft, amber glow over the plains of Gaugamela. It was October 1st, 331 BC, a date that would forever alter the tapestry of history. The Macedonian army stirred before the sun had fully risen, the chill of the desert night still clinging to their cloaks and armor. The air was thick with anticipation, every breath carrying the scent of dust and sweat, mingling with the sound of clinking metal as soldiers readied themselves for the battle that loomed ahead. Alexander, just 25 and already a conqueror of lands, stood at the heart of his men, his presence a beacon of confidence and resolve. His eyes, as sharp and piercing as the sword at his side, scanned the horizon where the vast Persian army lay in wait. Across the field, Darius III had amassed a force to be reckoned with, chariots armed with scythes, war elephants, and soldiers as numerous as the sands of the desert. The Persian king, determined to crush the Macedonian upstart, had chosen this ground for its open plains, ideal for his superior numbers and cavalry. Yet Alexander was no stranger to being outnumbered. His mind, a forge of tactical brilliance, saw beyond the obvious. As the sun climbed higher, the ground began to warm, the air buzzing with a rising tension that matched the heat. The Macedonian phalanx, a formidable wall of spears and shields, stood ready, their faces set in grim determination. Nearby, Alexander's elite cavalry, the companion cavalry, waited for their moment to strike, horses snorting and stamping impatiently, their muscles rippling under taut skin. The signal to advance came not with a shout, but a subtle gesture from Alexander's hand, a silent command that rippled through the ranks like a wave. The Macedonian army moved forward, the ground trembling beneath the synchronized march of thousands. In the distance, the Persian chariots began their charge, the earth shaking under the weight of their wheels, the air filled with the shrill cries of horses and the clatter of their deadly blades. Alexander's gaze never wavered, even as chaos erupted around him. He led from the front, his horse bounding across the terrain with a grace that belied the ferocity of the moment. As the chariots neared, the Macedonian archers loosed a volley of arrows, their shafts streaking through the sky like deadly comets, finding their marks with lethal precision. Horses whinnied in pain, chariots crashed to the ground, the acrid smell of blood and fear mingling in the air. In this theater of war, every decision was a gamble. The Macedonian line, seeming to buckle under the Persian assault, was a deception, a calculated feint to draw the enemy in. As the Persians pressed forward, Alexander saw his opportunity. With a swift command, he led the companion cavalry in a sweeping maneuver, a crescent of speed and power that cleaved through the enemy ranks. The clash of swords and the screams of men filled the air, a cacophony of conflict and courage. Amidst the dust and din, Alexander spied Darius, his chariot a gilded island in a sea of chaos. A moment of destiny lay before him. With a fierce cry, Alexander urged his horse forward, cutting a path through the melee towards the Persian king. But Darius, sensing the tide turning, fled the field, his departure a silent surrender that rippled through the Persian lines. The battle, though still raging, was lost for the Persians. Their morale shattered, their ranks began to crumble. The Macedonians pressed their advantage, the ground beneath them stained with the blood of friend and foe alike. Victory was theirs, but at a cost. A field littered with the fallen, the air heavy with the weight of loss and triumph intertwined. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield, the day drew to a close. The cries of the dying mingled with the soft murmur of the wind, a haunting requiem for the lives spent in pursuit of glory. Alexander, though victorious, felt the somber weight of his triumph. He walked among his men, offering words of comfort and praise, his voice a balm for the weary and the wounded. The night air was cool now, a gentle caress against skin and soul. The stars emerged, pinpricks of light in the vastness of the sky, as if the heavens themselves were watching, bearing witness to the deeds of men. Alexander stood alone for a moment, his thoughts a swirl of past and future. He had won a great victory, but at what cost? The vision of a united empire was closer. Yet he knew that each step forward was fraught with peril and sacrifice. In the quiet of the night, As his men settled into uneasy slumber, the weight of leadership pressed heavy upon him. The path ahead was uncertain, the road to glory paved with the bones of the fallen. But Alexander was undeterred. He was a man driven by a vision, a dream of a world united under one banner, one culture, one king. The wind whispered through the camp, carrying with it the scent of distant lands yet to be conquered. Alexander, silhouetted against the starlit sky, felt the pull of destiny. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new horizons. But for now, in the embrace of darkness, he allowed himself a moment of reflection, a silent vow to the men who had fought and died under his command. As sleep claimed the weary soldiers of Macedonia, the world paused, caught in the delicate balance between past and future, victory and loss. The legacy of Alexander the Great was still unfolding, a story written in the blood and dreams of those who dared to follow him into the unknown. And so, under the watchful eyes of the cosmos, history drifted into the quiet night, a lullaby of conquest and consequence, whispered softly into the ears of those who would dream of empires. The dust of Gaugamela settled slowly, like a weary cloak draping the earth. The Macedonian army stood victorious, their breaths mingling with the warm air, tasting of sweat and iron. Alexander, eyes scanning the horizon, felt the enormity of what had just transpired. This battle, this moment, had shifted the world on its axis. Around him, the remnants of Darius III's forces retreated into the vastness, the sound of their scattered footsteps lost in the whispers of the wind. Underneath the expanse of the azure sky, the plains bore silent witness to the clash, a stage now emptied of its grand actors. The sun dipped towards the west, casting long shadows over the battlefield, where once the cries of men and the clash of swords had filled the air. Now, a strange quietude prevailed, broken only by the occasional cry of a distant eagle. Alexander, the young king from Macedonia, had carved his name into the annals of history with the edge of his sword and the sharpness of his mind. In the aftermath of victory, Alexander's thoughts turned inward, towards the weight of his aspirations. The world he had envisioned, a tapestry woven from the threads of diverse cultures, was slowly taking form. Yet, in the triumph lay the seeds of uncertainty. His gaze drifted over his weary soldiers, who huddled together, their armor gleaming dully in the fading light. These men, his companions and comrades, had seen the face of destiny and emerged triumphant. But the price of their glory was etched in the lines of their faces and the scars on their bodies. Not far from Alexander, the body of Darius lay abandoned, a once mighty ruler reduced to a mere mortal in the dust. The Persian king's end had come not in the heat of battle, but in the cold betrayal of his own. His lifeless eyes stared skyward, unseeing, as if searching for answers among the stars. The air around him was heavy with the scent of earth and decay, a poignant reminder of the fragility of power and the inevitability of change. As the sun continued its descent, casting a warm glow over the landscape, Alexander walked among the fallen. Each step was a testament to his journey, each shadow a reflection of the path he had chosen. The Battle of Gaugamela had been a turning point, a moment when the world shifted and whispered of new beginnings. Alexander's mind, ever restless, danced with visions of what was to come, a united empire, stretching across continents, where knowledge and culture flowed freely like the rivers of his homeland. Yet amidst the dreams of conquest and legacy there lurked a shadow, the specter of mortality. Alexander was acutely aware of the transient nature of life, the thin veil that separated him from the void. The thought lingered at the edges of his consciousness, a reminder that even the greatest of men were not immune to time's relentless march. But for now, in the golden light of victory, he allowed himself a moment of reflection, of silent communion with the spirits of those who had fallen. In the days that followed, the Macedonian army continued its march, the sound of their footfalls a rhythmic echo in the dawn. The earth beneath them was firm, yet it bore the memory of countless battles, a silent testimony to the passage of history. Alexander led his men with a steady hand and an unwavering heart, his mind ever reaching for the horizon, for the lands yet to be discovered, for the stories yet to be told. His empire, though vast and sprawling, was still in its infancy. Alexander knew that the seeds of greatness he had planted needed nurturing, that the dream he had envisioned required more than just conquest. It needed unity, a blending of cultures and ideas, a synthesis of the old and the new. He imagined cities rising from the dust, where Greek and Persian influences danced together in harmony, where the air was filled with the sounds of debate and the fragrance of wisdom. Yet the path ahead was fraught with challenges. The wheels of power turned slowly, and the hearts of men were not easily swayed. Alexander understood that his vision of a united world was as much about persuasion as it was about conquest. He needed the loyalty of his subjects, the devotion of his soldiers, the trust of his allies. And so he spoke to them in measured tones, his words carrying the weight of his dreams, the warmth of his conviction. As the sun set on another day, casting its final rays over the expansive terrain, Alexander found solace in the quietude. The night air was cool, carrying with it the scent of distant rain and the promise of new beginnings. He stood at the edge of his camp, gazing into the vastness, the stars above twinkling like ancient sentinels. In that moment, he felt a kinship with the cosmos, an understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. The legacy of Alexander the Great was more than the territories he conquered or the battles he won. It was the enduring idea of a world where knowledge transcended borders, where cultures intertwined like the branches of a mighty oak. His journey was far from over, and though the future was uncertain, he embraced it with the heart of a warrior and the mind of a philosopher. In the quiet of the night, as the world around him slumbered, Alexander allowed himself to dream once more. And in his dreams, he saw a world transformed, a tapestry of diverse peoples united under a common banner. It was a vision that flickered like the distant stars, a beacon of hope and possibility. And as sleep gently claimed him, he knew that the turning point had come, that his legacy would endure, echoing through the corridors of time, inspiring generations yet unborn. The night deepened, wrapping the world in its embrace, and the whispers of history drifted softly on the breeze. Alexander lay still, his thoughts merging with the darkness, his heart beating in time with the rhythm of the universe. And as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the world shifted once more, forever changed by the dreams of a man who dared to conquer not just lands, but the very essence of what it meant to be great. The dust of battle settled slowly over the plains of Gaugamela. A thick, almost palpable silence enveloped the vast stretch of land, once alive with the clamor of clashing swords and the thunder of hooves. Now it lay quiet, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the distant grasses. The air was heavy with the scent of churned soil and sweat, mingling with the faint metallic tinge of blood, an indelible mark of the fierce struggle that had transpired. Alexander stood amidst the remnants of war, his gaze sweeping over the landscape that had borne witness to the triumph and tragedy of men. The weight of victory rested on his shoulders, yet it felt insubstantial compared to the gaping void left by the cost of conquest. Around him, his soldiers moved with a solemnity born out of exhaustion and reverence, tending to the wounded, whispering prayers for the fallen, their armor clinking softly with each step. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the field, the reality of what had been achieved began to sink in. Darius III, the formidable king of Persia, was no more, a ruler brought low by the machinations of betrayal and the relentless pursuit of an indomitable rival. The Persian Empire, once the most powerful force across the lands, lay fractured, its legacy now vulnerable to the ambitions of those who would seek to carve out their own destinies from its remnants. In the days that followed, the camp buzzed with the activity of recovery and reflection. The wounded were cared for with the tenderness of comrades who had shared the crucible of combat, their groans punctuating the otherwise hushed conversations that filled the air. The dead were honored with rites befitting warriors, their pyres sending spirals of smoke into the sky, an offering to the gods, a farewell to heroes. Alexander, though a conqueror celebrated by his men, found himself drawn into the quieter corners of his dominion. He walked among the tents, pausing to speak with those who had fought beside him, acknowledging their courage and sacrifice with words of gratitude and promises of glory. His presence was both a balm and a beacon, a reminder of why they had ventured so far from home, of the vision that bound them together under a single banner. Yet, even as the Macedonian king moved through his camp, his thoughts wandered to the broader implications of his victory. He saw not just the expanse of territory now under his command, but the cultural tapestry that would be woven from the mingling of Greek and Persian traditions. In this new world, he envisioned cities rising from the dust, centers of knowledge and enlightenment, where the philosophies of Aristotle might blend with the wisdom of the East. It was a dream as vast as the terrain he had traversed, as enduring as the stars that now began to twinkle in the night sky above him. As weeks turned into months, the initial fervor of conquest gave way to the practicalities of governance. The cities of the Persian Empire, each with its own history and customs, required not just a ruler, but a unifier. Alexander dispatched emissaries to negotiate alliances, to ensure the stability of his burgeoning empire. He appointed satraps to oversee these regions, choosing men who had proven their loyalty and acumen in battle, men who understood the delicate balance between authority and diplomacy. But for all the achievements and aspirations, there remained the haunting specter of mortality. Alexander, ever aware of the fleeting nature of life, pondered his own existence amidst the ruins of empires. He remembered his father, King Philip II, whose assassination had set him on this path to greatness, and his mother, Queen Olympias, whose ambition had fueled his own. The echoes of their influence reverberated through his actions, shaping the destiny he now held in his hands. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the world lay still and the air was cool with the promise of a new day, Alexander would retreat to his tent, seeking solace in the solitude. There, beneath the canvas canopy, he grappled with the questions that had no easy answers. Questions of legacy, of purpose, of the price that must be paid for immortality. He knew that despite his conquests, despite the lands he had claimed and the enemies he had vanquished, he was but a man, a mortal bound by the same fate as those who had come before him. The months after Gaugamela were a time of rebuilding, of laying the foundations for the Hellenistic world that would emerge from the ashes of Persia. Cities were fortified, roads constructed, trade routes established, all under the watchful eye of a ruler determined to leave an indelible mark on history. Yet, for all the tangible progress, it was the intangible legacy that Alexander cherished most, the exchange of ideas, the fusion of cultures, the seeds of enlightenment that he hoped would flourish long after his reign. And so, as nights passed into days and seasons cycled through their eternal dance, the world began to heal from the wounds of war. The scars remained, reminders of the battles fought and the lives lost, but they were also testaments to resilience, to the enduring spirit of those who had dared to dream of a united empire. Alexander, the architect of this new age, stood at the heart of it all, a figure both revered and human, a king who had touched the divine yet remained tethered to the earth. In the end, as the fires of the past dimmed and the future stretched out before him like an uncharted canvas, Alexander embraced the uncertainty of what lay ahead. He knew that his story, like all great tales, would be told through the generations, whispered in the quiet corners of the night by those who sought to understand the man behind the legend. And as he drifted into sleep, lulled by the gentle rustle of the evening breeze, he carried with him the hope that his legacy would endure, not just in the lands he had conquered, but in the hearts and minds of those who would follow in his footsteps. The moon hung low over the ancient world, casting its silvery glow upon lands that had once echoed with the footsteps of Alexander the Great. As the centuries slipped by, the tales of his conquests and charisma grew, whispered among the stars and shadows. His name became legend, a tapestry woven with threads of truth and myth, colored by the imaginations of those who told his story, their voices soft in the quiet of the night. Long after his empire had fractured and faded, the memory of Alexander lingered like the scent of cedar and myrrh in the halls of history. He was remembered as the young king who had dared to dream beyond the horizons, whose ambitions knew no bounds. In Alexandria, a city that bore his name, scholars with ink-stained fingers and weary eyes sifted through scrolls and papyrus, seeking to preserve the knowledge he had spread. The library there, a beacon of enlightenment, was a testament to his vision, a convergence of cultures and ideas where Greek philosophy mingled with Egyptian lore and Persian wisdom. Yet as time wore on, the clarity of Alexander's deeds became clouded. like a reflection in a rippling pool. To some, he was a hero, a demigod who had bridged the East and West, who had brought the light of Hellenism to distant lands. His military genius and strategic prowess were lauded in tales that painted him as invincible, a figure of awe and inspiration. To others, he was a conqueror whose insatiable hunger for power led to destruction and chaos, leaving behind a world scarred by conflict. The truth lay somewhere in between, obscured by the mists of time. In lands once under his rule, the echoes of his reign could still be felt. The cities he founded, like pearls strung across the vastness of his empire, became centers of trade and culture. Greek became a lingua franca, a common tongue that bridged the diverse peoples of the ancient world. The arts flourished, inspired by the fusion of Greek and Eastern influences, a legacy of beauty and innovation born from the ashes of conquest. Yet, with the light came shadows. The fall of the Persian Empire created a power vacuum, and in the wake of Alexander's death, his generals, known as the Diadochi, carved up his empire like vultures picking at a feast. The unity he had sought to create crumbled, and the territories he had once ruled descended into a tumult of rivalries and wars. The dream of a united world, where cultures could coexist under a single crown, slipped away like sand through fingers. In the centuries that followed, the myths of Alexander took on a life of their own. In the East, he was known as Iskander, a figure of legend in Persian and Islamic traditions. Stories of his exploits mingled with folklore, and he was cast as a wise king, a seeker of the water of life, a hero who faced supernatural challenges. In the West, medieval romances transformed him into a knightly figure, his adventures chronicled in colorful epics that bore little resemblance to the reality of his campaigns. Yet even as his image was reshaped by the cultures that inherited his legacy, the impact of his life was undeniable. His campaigns had opened up the world, creating pathways for trade and exchange. The Silk Road, that fabled network of routes, carried not just goods but ideas, philosophies, religions, and inventions that flowed between East and West, enriching both. His legacy also lay in the lessons learned from his reign. The notion of a unified world, though never fully realized, inspired future empires and leaders. Caesar, Napoleon, and countless others looked to Alexander as a model, an ideal of what could be achieved through vision and determination. His life became a mirror reflecting the aspirations and hubris of those who followed in his footsteps. Yet with every telling, with every retelling, something was lost. The man behind the myth, the flesh and blood Alexander, faded into the shadows of his own legend. His friendships, his fears, his frailties, these were eclipsed by the grandeur of his conquests. History remembered the warrior, the king, the icon, but the whispers of the night still spoke of the young man who had once dreamed of glory beneath the Macedonian stars. And so, as the world turned and ages passed, the legacy of Alexander the Great continued to unfold. A story that was never truly finished, but rather lived on, whispered by the winds over the landscapes he had once walked. Like the gentle rustle of olive leaves in the night, his influence lingered, subtle and profound, shaping the course of civilizations in ways both seen and unseen. As the listener drifts into slumber, eyes closed, the tales of Alexander merge with dreams. The sounds of distant battles fade into the rhythm of a heartbeat, and the scent of ancient scrolls mingles with the cool night air. The story of Alexander the Great, told in the hush of darkness, becomes a part of the listener's own journey, a reminder of the enduring power of dreams and the eternal quest for legacy in the tapestry of time. In the quiet aftermath of conquest, as the echoes of battle fade into the vastness of history, Alexander's tale leaves us pondering the eternal dance of human ambition and frailty. The air is thick with the scent of ancient soil and the distant murmur of forgotten languages, whispering secrets of empires that rose and fell, carried on the winds of time. We find ourselves nestled in the space between dreams and memory, where the shadows of greatness and the specters of loss intermingle. Alexander, a man whose name became a legend, was driven by an insatiable hunger to carve his mark upon the world, to stitch together the fabric of disparate lands into a tapestry of unity. Yet in his relentless pursuit, we glimpse the paradox of power. The very force that propels us forward can unravel the bonds of our humanity. His love for his companions, his vision for a world without borders, were tempered by the burdens of leadership and the weight of expectation. The night sky, vast and eternal, mirrors the unending cycle of rise and decline, of creation and dissolution. Stars flicker above, distant yet immediate, much like the tales of those who have walked before us. In the grand narrative of existence, Alexander's story is but one thread, shining brilliantly, then fading into the fabric of time. It speaks to the duality of our nature, our capacity for unparalleled achievement, and our vulnerability to the ravages of fate. And so, as the soft cloak of night envelops us, we are left to reflect on the legacy of this warrior king. In the quiet corners of our minds, we ponder the truths his life reveals about our own desires, our own dreams. As we drift deeper into the embrace of sleep, the story of Alexander mingles with our own, an invitation to explore the depths of our potential, to navigate the labyrinth of our aspirations, and to find peace in the gentle rhythm of our breath as the world slowly fades into silence.